frustrated because you have a lack of focus and concentration. You can't concentrate on reading books, do your schoolwork, or anything. And then they pop a pill onto you and tell you to take this. It's going to make things all better. Imagine if the earth and one plant could provide so many solutions to that problem. Amongst the living soil right beneath our feet, and the one plant we all grown to love. Won't you join the conversation as we interview Rubber Ducky Isopods? Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Organically Blunt. I am Jay Blaze, your host, and this evening I have the pleasure and the opportunity to speak with Rubber Ducky Isopods. Welcome to the Organically Blunt show.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So I want to dive right into things, ADHD, Adderall, and cannabis, just like the title says. So let's take it back to the beginning. What was your experience with ADHD medications growing up?
So when I was basically in middle school, my teacher started to notice that I was constantly wanting to move around. To this day, even throughout this interview, I will shake my legs. They jitter all the time. And so that was very pronounced in a quiet classroom. And so my teachers would be like, yo, quit jittering, quit moving around. And so I would try my best. But then in maybe, 5 minutes in a little kid's life is a long time. And so then I would start doing it again. Sometimes they would kick me out of class. And so by the time I got to ninth grade, my mom was pretty, almost upset with me, thinking that like I just constantly was trying to be like a kid that was rebelling. And part of that was true. But part of it was really I just never noticed that I would always be shaking like that. And so she went to the doctor. Then eventually I went to the doctor with her, and they started giving me something called Dexedrine. And when I was given that, I started to notice, a couple of days would go by that I really wasn't eating as much as normal. And I was playing soccer at a pretty high level at this point. And so I felt like things started to change. So we go back to the doctor, and he talks about something called Ritalin. So they put me on Ritalin. And I'm taking Ritalin, I think, until basically the summer before my senior year. And I'm tired of taking Ritalin. There's just a lot of side effects with all of this kind of stuff. And so it finally gets me to Adderall. And once I started to take Adderall, it was kind of almost like a super drug at first. Like if you took that and wanted to study and you actually had ADHD, it seemed like it was this super drug. But if I took it for a long term, I started to get almost paranoid about certain things. I was constantly worried about things that I never worried about before. And I felt like it was changing my brain. And so I was telling my family this, but I was actually doing decent in school so that I could continue playing sports. So they didn't want to hear any of that. And so when I was almost my first semester of going into my senior year, this gentleman named Greg Fisher used to pick me up so I didn't have to ride the bus anymore. And one of those days he saw me kind of pop a pill and chug a water, and he asked me what that was. I told him it's Adderall. And then basically he looked at me like, well, where the hell do you get that? And I said, my mom makes my doctor give it to me. And that was basically in that moment in his little Toyota Tacoma is when I discovered that I had a little gold mine here. Is because whatever Adderall was, I didn't even know really what I was taking. Was in hindsight, it's legal speed, and it's very effective, especially for people that just kind of maybe use it once in a while to study and this kind of stuff. Well, at that time, I was given 30 milligrams, which was as far as I understood, the highest amount. And remember, I'm 16, but I still don't even I don't have money for a car or anything, so it just kind of sucks, all this kind of stuff. I'm taking these pills. They're making me feel a certain way, usually anxious over nothing, feeling anxiety over the littlest things, that kind of stuff. And so when I would take Adderall, and then I would actually kind of almost maybe take it on a Monday and then maybe take it on a Thursday and kind of coast in high school, I started to actually sell these to my friends. And that's when I started to realize that there's a commerce, there's a gray world. I actually had friends in my little neighborhood that started to explain how the the kind of black market world works to a white kid. And once I started to understand that kind of stuff, I then went down to Valdosta State University, and down there, it's pretty close to a place called Jacksonville, Florida, and that is a huge party town. And Adderall was something that was needed because of all of the local colleges and stuff down there. So I was able to go down to the larger football games. Georgia, Florida games are played in Jacksonville, all of these things. And that's why I truly discovered the power of, at least at that time, a 30 milligram Adderall pill could get you into a VIP club, could get you into kind of almost where you wanted to move as a young kid. And they were giving me this stuff. I mean, I had bottles of this stuff and I wouldn't even take it. And so that's kind of where my life led, is because I wanted to find an alternative. I enjoyed smoking cannabis. And then when I finally was in, I think it was my second year of college, that's when we started to find out about like high-end cannabis, not just like brick smushed weed with seeds in it that we would throw in like a peach swisher or an Optimo. And that's kind of how we smoked cannabis until I got into my college days. And then once we started to truly understand, I think, more about cannabinoids and maybe some more of the things we probably should have been focused on in the earlier days of how it would be in medicine, that's when I discovered Blue Dreams. And Blue Dreams actually had some of those effects that people were claiming. And I was in Savannah, Georgia at the time. I was working with this dude named Randall Davis. He was extremely intelligent, was trying to kind of show me the ropes on this thing called a polarized refrigerant oil additive. That's called a PROA. It would improve the AC units and all this shit, right? So I'd pack up everything. I'm just trying to make it work with this guy. Turns out this guy loves to smoke, has one of the best contacts to this day that I had ever met. And so he started to teaching me about like the difference between indica and sativa and how one was supposedly a body high and one was supposedly a head high. And this is probably around 2001, 2002. So it wasn't like everybody was talking about that shit. And until I met this gentleman, I didn't even know that kind of stuff existed. And so that's when I started to smoke Blue Dreams. That's when I realized I don't even really need Adderall if I just kind of have this gentleman as my contact. And that's how I started to move throughout life, just kind of coasting, if you will, in the early days, because to this day, I don't even really know why they give you so many. Like, it's 30 milligrams, and I was supposed to break it in half, right? And then if it wasn't really working, then I was supposed to take the other half. But no one was really checking anything. So I was just telling everybody, basically my mother and my father and my teacher, that I was taking the full one every day. And I was breaking them in half and sometimes selling them for $20 for the half, or $30 for the whole. And after those kind of things, you know, it's hard not for the light bulb to come on when people started,
right?
You know, what the hell does this guy got? So anyway, because I saw that stuff and I saw, you know, there's a huge party scene down in Florida, man. There's Florida State University. There's the University of Miami down there. A lot of Georgia fans go down there because there's so many football games, Clemson, Alabama. I mean, it is almost unbelievable about the amount of people that you can come into contact with. And so I can imagine. Yeah, so I saw pretty much everything, even a couple widespread panic concerts where I saw, you know, I'd never seen black tar heroin. I don't know what the fuck that is. But I saw it at that concert, man, and I saw people doing it. So to this day, that's why I've been really selective on the drugs that I've even wanted to try to do. And I'm really big into psychedelics. I've enjoyed DMT, where I felt like I've blasted off at least one time in my life. It was fantastic. And then most of the other parts of my life, you know, I just have enjoyed cannabis for these last few years, probably these last 4 or 5 years, and drinking water, man, and trying to be a little healthier. And so ADHD for me is like, for my children right now being in school, it's going to be a little bit of a ride, a roller coaster. But I'm so happy that especially my stepson has ADHD, because in my opinion, I think that allows you in the business world to be able to like think about something and focus on something else. And that seems to be one of the only real positives for ADHD, is that since you can't hyper focus on one thing, you are able to kind of not as, you know, it's not your full attention, but at the same time, you're able to put a little more attention into maybe 2 or 3 things than the average person that doesn't have ADHD. So it's like, okay, great. The attribute might be at a 6, where most people could truly focus on something at a 9. And I think that's where the Adderall would come in, because then that shit was on like a 12, and you would want to like stay home and not go out. And so it just changed my personality, changed my mentality. And then cannabis showed me that there was something better. And then that's when I really got into more of just trying to understand that food is medicine, how is cannabis being grown actually matters, that kind of stuff.
So you grew up basically, from my gathering, in Florida. And I remember prior to...
I grew up in Georgia, just to...
Okay. Well, you went to Florida a lot. When did you make the move to Colorado? And what was growing cannabis in Colorado like for you? Is one of my questions, because, you know, and in my opinion, as a Michigan person pretty much all my life, I've never got the experience until we became recreational here, the opportunity of what we call the green rush, which the green rush started basically in Colorado, Oregon, and California, out that way. But, you know, you ask people in Michigan, especially from my era, and they're going to say, well, it all started out in Colorado. You know, they got legal first, and then that's kind of where everything kind of modeled after. So what was that like for you as somebody that was learning to grow? You started growing there, and you moved there and started experiencing the atmosphere of being surrounded by it.
I was in Savannah, Georgia at the time, and I met one of the most unique people I've ever met. His name was Phil Collins. So it sounds like the singer. He was adopted, and he was adopted from North Korea. Wow. And so he was one of the more like, just everybody would always ask him, "Are you real? Is your name really Phil Collins?" You know, yes. He was adopted actually by a Jewish family. So technically he's Phil Collins, the North Korean Jew. And so that, in a weird way, when we're in Savannah, he's going to this place called SCAD. It opens up so many different people that had cannabis contacts and that kind of stuff. And so we started to figure out that there were some places in New Jersey that you could go to. There's some places in Colorado that you could go to. And so we truly became, we used to call it being a cowboy, and driving some stuff for people that were better at us or more well-funded than us, and started to realize some things that you could potentially do. And once I got to a certain level with that, I met a girl in Statesboro, Georgia, and I found out that she was in Colorado, like all of her family and that kind of stuff. And at that time, she's kind of like my right-hand lady. So I thought that this could potentially be something. So I moved to Colorado, and we started to actually have those connections with Mr. Phil Collins. And to this day, that's probably the only person I've ever had in my entire life that I felt like no matter what was going on, he had my back. So like one time we were racing down to, we enjoyed playing poker together, right? We're racing down to try to get to the boats, because the way gambling works in Savannah is you have to be on the boat, and then the boat gets to international water, and then you can gamble. So it's not like you can just go to the brick and mortar casino. So we're racing down the highway, smoking a blunt. Cop car lights come on. He without hesitation, he grabs the little bag, he throws it out the window. To this day, for whatever reason, the cop never came and pulled us over. And so I just felt like he always had my back with that. I could have, there's 1,000 examples of where there's no hesitation. He just understands what needs to be done. And you have me almost reminiscing about that dude, because I lost contact with him. But Phil Collins from North Korea, man, was an OG, and somebody that had a real good heart in a place that most people could care less about you.
Right. Now, I could have swore you told me you worked in the commercial cannabis space for a while doing organic growing. And what has that brought to the table as far as being not only a home grower, but being able to experience that firsthand, because not everybody gets that opportunity. Some people dream of it, some people don't. some people are exposed to it and they're like me tonight. I met a CEO of a dispensary that does everything organic here in Michigan tonight at an event I went to. And I'm actually going to go in the fall because I'm booked out until fall with shows. But in the fall, I'm going to go and visit the facility and check it out firsthand. But for somebody, that might not be exposed to that, and even you, how has that process been for you?
So here in Colorado, I got hired as a trimmer, and that's basically like a bar back in the cannabis world. And I would be sitting there trimming. And to be fair, like if the big boss man came in the room and he was asking a question about humidity or something within reason, I was trying to let him know, hey, I can do more than just trim over here. And so after about a year mark, there was an opportunity to be an assistant head grower. And so I kind of let it be known that I would love to put my name into that. And so when I became the assistant head grower, I started to learn about things that was going on in this supposed medical marijuana facility. And we were behind the curtain. The main gentleman was spraying something called Avid, or sometimes even something called Forbid. And these were horrible products, especially in that time. You were supposed to have a medical card. This was for people that had serious ailments. And this head grower was basically just being a real piece of shit, man. And so when I brought this up, unfortunately, that was probably the wrong thing to do, is because I guess the owners are already kind of in on it because they weren't able to grow cannabis in this way. And from that point on, I started, at least here in Denver, I partnered up with the Denver Normal crew. There's a whole national Normal, but usually if you're in a big enough city, you'll have like a little local crew. And I was hanging out with them enough to where I started to talk about these things, and they asked me if I would do a little presentation. I did that presentation, showed a living soil setup, showed how you can use a cover crop. This was all like, now everybody's heard about this stuff, but at the time people were looking at me, and to be honest, a lot of this stuff, and I've always said this to this day, came from Jeff Lowenfels and Dr. Elaine Ingham, and I always want to give credit where credit's due. I read those books. I watched her early videos. It's not like any of this shit was my idea. I just was trying to figure this stuff out so that I could grow a little bit better cannabis than my peers, because in the early days, it was kind of amazing what people were willing to pay for just high-end cannabis that they can impress their friends with. And so from this point on, that's where we really tried to take it to the next level of growing commercial cannabis. And so then I went out to Oklahoma for a little while and was trying to get something set up. And in hindsight there, some things derailed. Some people did some things to me that I never thought would happen. I was using the word brother and stuff with certain stuff. But in hindsight, because of COVID and because of the way those things it happened in December of 2019. So right as February of 2020 hit, I basically was sitting in my kitchen trying to figure things out. And I'm very grateful for that, because I don't think if COVID would have ever happened that I would have been able to slow down enough to kind of really think these things out almost as chess moves instead of always reacting to life like checkers. And so I am grateful for some of the things of, I don't know how you felt during COVID, man, but not really being able to go outside really, or having everybody act like the little chick in the sky was falling, was kind of scary at that time, especially like February, March, April. And so I said, you know what, man, if it really is like the end of the world, then I'm going to get back into these things that I was showing on Instagram. And the first one was the Zebra Isopod. So it's a little roly-poly. They come from France. I was using those when I had another Instagram account. It was called 303 Organic Cannabis. That was at that same time when I found out that basically any medical marijuana facility in Colorado was spraying some kind of bullshit. Even if it was like, hey, these 5 things are, forbidden. The 6th thing that was on that list, that's what everybody would be using. And so I was really focused on being like, that's why I even said 303 Organic Cannabis. I kind of wanted to put it out there. And from that point on, I started to realize that more and more people wanted to hear about this. I was doing some talks around town. They even were doing these like sushi nights, and then we would talk about how to grow cannabis in a living soil system. I met this gentleman that was doing the Indo Expos. I think they were around the country for a little bit, but they're basically well known here in Denver, Colorado. I started to give talks on those, and people started to really resonate with that. And so from my little interest, that's why to this day, like podcasts and all of these things, people think, it's no big deal, man. Who's going to really see these things? You'd be surprised. So to you, man, when you kind of feel those days, like I was saying, not every day is exciting, and not every day you want to finish out doing these kind of things. But just showing up is really the smaller secret to success. There's a lot of other variables to it, but literally just showing up every week, every month, trying to make things happen for yourself is a huge part of it. And I don't think enough people realize. Yeah, man.
Definitely. So you did touch on the isopods a little bit, but we got to dive into the name a little bit. How did you come up with the name Rubber Ducky Isopods?
So when I was sitting at that kitchen table, like I was saying, to try to make things cool, there was another social media app called Mass Roots, right? And that was all cannabis related, very popular in those days. So if you could have something a little bit different or growing, I'd throw kefir on top of an avocado, that looked cool, that kind of stuff. And so I was using the zebra isopods, and I was using the ladybugs at that time, praying mantis, kind of the earlier jumping spiders. It's kind of the earlier like IPM, using Mother Nature to combat Mother Nature. And so after my 303 organic cannabis account got deleted, that's when I tried to remember, like, all right, well, what was popular on that account? And the most popular thing was those little zebra isopods. So when I'm sitting at the kitchen counter, I'm typing in zebra isopods, Googling some stuff, and then I'm trying to think of like, well, what's another isopod that people would want? And so I typed in designer isopod, and I think it was like raised cockroaches or something popped up, and then he was selling something called a rubber ducky isopod. And so then I Googled that, rubber ducky isopod, and I found out that those things originated in Thailand, and they had just been discovered in 2017. And so that's when I feel like, if you've ever grown up where you have to learn how to kind of take care of yourself, the product is what matters, right? The quality is where it's at. So we've always joked, hey, if we had to flip teapots, we'd be hustling against those little old ladies, but best believe we'd be showing up with these fancy teapots. We used to have shirts that said, if the grapes don't sell, we'll dry them up and sell raisins. I think a lot of people kind of have that mentality. So from a bug point of view, these were like a gold mine to me because they look like little rubber duckies. I know that a ton of people would be into this kind of stuff. And so I took a class on this online educational site called Udemy at the same time during COVID. And I taught myself SEO, search engine optimization, and I taught myself Shopify e-commerce. And in those courses, I learned that if you're able to find a product like Kleenex, well, best believe, buddy, you want to be calling yourself Kleenex. And so I felt like I found that with Rubber Ducky. So I wanted to call myself Rubber Ducky Isopods because I knew way back when that people would be typing that one in more than any other isopod for the search engine optimization. And that's why I think to this day, a lot of people are able to find us just because we're able to have like the little cute hats. I got one on Bear Lion company that the dude in Chicago. Shout out to Tim. But there's a lot of things I think that are almost like collectibles. There's probably over 1,000 different isopods that I could kind of show you. There's probably over a couple hundred of the Cubaris, which is the Rubber Ducky isopod version. There's all these different versions of those. Some of the ones that are from Thailand that have spikes that are at the macro level. I've seen 6 of those go for $1,000 before, and people are, fighting over who's going to pay to get that kind of stuff. So the isopod world is something that I think if you could have seen it in the forefront, now everybody's trying to do it, which is fair. But I also think that that's again where the cannabis aspects come back. Is there's a lot of IPM issues if an isopod breeder is trying to go bioactive. So bioactive in my world is the same thing as living soil in the cannabis space. You're using the same words, you're using Mother Nature. And so that's why, in my opinion, hard work and a little bit of the soil understanding from the early days have allowed us to be just a little bit of, our bugs are just a little bit shinier. The same thing with cannabis, right? Like, how do you get the trichomes and everything to be a little bit better? Because everybody, for the most part, can grow good weed, especially this day and age. But how do we get to the great weed? How do we get to the weed that brings people back? When we were selling weed, our whole motto, every time we even went out and had our little steak dinners and patting each other on the back and all that bullshit, the only business is repeat business. I think that's a huge motto for an entrepreneur to remember that. Every little person that's willing to give you money, you need to never forget how grateful you should be for that, because that means that they actually trust you and what you're trying to build up. And so as the years have progressed, I'm happy to say that Rubber Ducky Isopods, with probably a year or two, will be known as a national brand. And I think part of that has come from just trying to understand how cannabis worked, man, figure things out, seeing opportunities. I see you now, going after opportunities where probably most people are wondering why you're doing it. And I probably had at least 2 years, including where my wife was looking at me like, what the hell are we doing over here? We're buying all these bugs. You're telling me people are going to buy it. It's still COVID. It's not like we can go sell them at an expo. But I was telling her we got to get all these things so that we got all this stuff so we can basically hoard all the cool stuff and come out as one of the first brands with the whole like designer isopod vibe to it, the bougier bioactive stuff. They had never even seen a closed loop system before. So there's a lot of opportunities still for people that are into cannabis to come up with some kind of IMO or FAA or something like that would improve soil systems, because there's a lot of people that are using isopods now to feed their reptiles. And that's a whole nother world that my wife and I are getting into as well.
Okay, so I gotta ask some beginner, what I call green level questions, because there's a lot of newer growers in our audience that don't, for one, know what an isopod exactly is. I should bring up a picture, but I'll probably mess it up here, and I don't want to mess up the live stream. And number two is, how do you apply them? And are they considered a beneficial bug for cannabis, or where are they categorized? And if they are, I know I'm asking a lot of questions here, but if they are, what, I guess you'd say, like ladybugs, they go after aphids. What do these bugs target, and what are they protecting my plant from? I guess you'd say. That's how I could put it into layman's terms as best I could.
Sure. So isopods, and let me be clear, isopods that you find in the wild, we call those basic grays. Even in my world, they have zero value, absolutely zero value, because they breed too quickly. They want to actually eat whatever is out there. And so when you see living soil guys that are making compost outdoors and then bringing that compost indoors to their raised beds and saying all these isopods are roly-polies, is, wood louse, all the fancy names, the little roly-polies that you used to kind of see when there was healthier prairie grass back in the day. These are found all over the world, and some of the more unique ones are found in Thailand and Vietnam. And so when you have these isopods, if you're trying to use this for a cannabis growing environment, you want to make sure that you're using something that's called a Porcellio laevis. And the reasons you want to use a Porcellio laevis isopod is because they are protein hungry. They're almost programmed, if you will, to eat protein so much that they would actually start to eat each other before they're going to eat your plants. If you put basic gray isopods in with your raised beds, they're going to eat your roots and eat your plants. So this is if you're going to get into this world, you have to be somewhat educated to make sure that you don't make huge mistakes. But if you're willing to take the time to understand this stuff, an isopod, a roly-poly, is a decomposer. They break down organic matter into carbon. Carbon is the money of the living soil bioactive world. So if everybody's got more money in their pocket, everything starts to become alive and thriving. And that's what you're after when you're building a living soil system. So an isopod if built correctly, will work in a symbiotic relationship with a springtail, will work in a symbiotic relationship with a red wiggler composting worm, so that you can break down organic matter at a faster rate to keep up with the hungry girls of a cannabis plant. And then as you continue to chop and drop and things continue to grow, you put cannabis back into that raised bed system that's already grown cannabis out. Those roots tap into those other roots that are already within that soil system. And the isopods, the springtails, and the composting worms just continue to churn that for you. You can take it to a next level if you want to use more of like a hybrid. An African nightcrawler, in my opinion, would be the perfect beginner, like mid-level composting worm. It's because they are called night crawlers, because at night they come to the top to feed. So you don't necessarily always have to worry about compaction if you want to play around with a few of these things, because those worms are going to come up at night and continue to build what's known as dissolved oxygen channels. Those little channels that they're building, they're going to have more composting worms that are falling in there, like red wigglers. They're going to have the springtails that are eventually falling in there. The springtails also kind of ride on the composting worm on something called a biofilm. And that biofilm that's going into that soil system is better than any product you've ever seen on that shelf. And that's why living soil, in my opinion, has got to be at the forefront if you really are taking, farming cannabis as for medicine, or farming cannabis as you want to put your name on it, put your stamp on it. This is quality stuff. I make better stuff than my peers, and here's the proof. In my opinion, for most people, unless they've probably put a decade or two into understanding the plant on a chemical side, salt side, the easier way to do that is to trust Mother Nature. I've always said it probably takes about 4 years to become a high level thinking grower. And I know that's not a short time, but that's not a long time either. And understanding how to build and grow with Mother Nature in 4 years, I assure you that you're going to be growing better cannabis than you ever thought you could.
Absolutely. Definitely. And there's so much you can learn, but at the same time, the way I put it, you never stop learning. People can never know it all. And that's where guests like you and other guests that I've had have blown my mind, because every time I meet someone, I get a piece of knowledge that I didn't have. And it's great, because then when I take this knowledge and I put it in my grow pod, as I put it, and mix it all together, I develop something that works for me and my environment. And I use pieces of multiple education that I've received to put it forward and create hopefully a beautiful yielding plant that gives me exactly what I'm looking for. But if you don't, you're always going to go back to the drawing board and try to figure out what you did wrong or where you can improve. And I feel that beneficial bugs, in my opinion, as an organic grower, and any other type of beneficials, or even just any type of tool that you're using to improve the grow, is going to be beneficial in the long term if you learn how to use it correctly. And that's why my biggest thing was, as I was asking, was how you apply them, because most people probably would just not even know. And if there's a select way that you have to apply isopods to your grow, how would you recommend doing it? Would it be something you do in the morning, something you do in the evening? Does the time of day matter?
I wouldn't say any of that matters. If you decide to play around with them, you are going to see that they're pretty intelligent for what they are. And it kind of reminded me the first time when I saw, like, kind of strategically how they were setting up their little cave, if you will, under some cork bark, was the way that the praying mantis ended up kind of seeing me and moving around. I don't know if you've ever been around where you kind of lock eyes with the praying mantis. Sometimes they'll start to sway. And I don't know what that is. Granted, we were eating a lot of mushrooms back then, man. But there was one night where I swear I was looking at him and he was looking at me, and we had a moment like, what the fuck, dude? And he was just going back and forth. And it was very interesting. The nature indoors, the way that cannabis farming, especially in the early days with the tent, it became such a perfect little environment that you could play around in that. Isopods can, for the most part, especially the Porcellio laevis, the one I'm recommending, that's kind of like the if you can't get those guys to breed and take hold, you need to find another hobby. And so that's why I always recommend those first, because it's pretty hard to mess those guys up. You would just release them out. I'd probably do maybe 12 into a larger, maybe 25-gallon. I don't know, a raised bed. Maybe do the same amount. I mean, they breed fairly quickly, and that's kind of the nice aspect of it is they'll break things down. Especially the Porcellio laevis orange, I would say is the best. There's Porcellio laevis dairy cow, Porcellio laevis milkback, Porcellio laevis caramel, and they all breed at different rates. The reproduction rates for dairy cow is the apex, and then I would say at the lower would be the caramels or the orange dairy cows, and I've always seen that, especially if you play around with them. We used to use the ladybugs. Now I'd recommend using the green lacewings. It's a better ROI. There's, especially where you get the ladybugs. We could have a whole show about ladybugs, man, and how that, especially if you're on a large commercial grow, how you could potentially be adding issues into your grow environment and stuff. So it all comes down to the soil, in my opinion, especially when we were in Oklahoma and setting things up and trying to let people know that it's the worm farms, or at least in my opinion, it was the worm farm that needed to be set up before the lights, all of the other things. We needed to have that life starting to build into these large, I would say they're probably 100-gallon fabric parts that we put on these little like wheelers. But not everybody agreed on that at first, and so it takes a while to churn and get these things going. But once you have that worm farm, now you could potentially inoculate a variety of different raised beds, a variety of different fabric pots from that one worm farm that you've been working on for 6 months, instead of just starting everything from scratch. So if I was starting, today after watching this podcast, I want to do some organic cannabis farming because I'm tired of basically smoking mids and having people judge me for it. The best way to do that is to trust Mother Nature. And she really does understand how to grow a plant. And so if you can get some high-end genetics, or even if you start out with some maybe just basic genetics, the best part of a living soil system is that it is improving over time. So week after week, month after month, maybe potentially failed harvest or maybe low harvest, those potentials don't hit as hard like they do in a rock wool grow type setup, chemical grow, deep water culture grow, because you have to start all over and you have to clean all those things. I mean, a living soil system, especially if it's staying clean, you're focused on your water. Chloramine is just as important as chlorine, that kind of stuff. Taking it to the next level, you should be able to see improvement within probably about 6 months, where the genetics that you've been growing, that you're used to, the colors that they're giving, maybe the size that they're giving off, all of a sudden you can physically see that with your eye, that things are changing within the same genetics that you're using. And then from that point on, that's when genetics, in my opinion at least, really start to matter, is because you have a little bit of a skill set, right? So you already know how to ride the motorcycle. Now it's time to kind of get your bearings and get ready to take it to the next level. And in my opinion, that's going to be the genetics, your environment, and then eventually your lights.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of other variables. I mean, I almost feel like I could just go, but if you're brand new to it, the lights matter more than you think, the genetics matter more than you think, and the soil should be at the top of the list.
Definitely. You're the second person bug related that I've had on this show in the 4 years that we've done it. And I must say, you're the second person also amongst a couple other people in the community that have told me, and I don't want to dive into it deep, but ladybugs, that green lace is a better way to go versus the ladybugs. And I haven't done it personally, but I can tell you last year alone, I released roughly 5,000 ladybugs into my grow. This year, maybe I'll look at doing things a little bit different.
Now, I will say that if you probably start off with that many ladybugs, there is potential, and again, it depends on the quality of your light, but if you can get them to breed, and this is actually pretty hard to do inside a tent or a basement grow, but if you can get those ladybugs to breed, that little larvae looks like a baby alligator. That little baby alligator is unbelievable as a seek and destroyer, but there's almost like an art form to getting those ladybugs to breed, because for whatever reason, I'm sure like Matthew Gates or someone at that level could explain it. But they seem to need sunlight to be able to breed at that level, or to breed to where you actually see the little baby alligator larvae. Other than that, in my opinion, it's a complete waste of time. And I would spend money on the green lacewings. And if you're really trying to be more proactive and preventative, I would use jumping spiders. They don't actually have a webbing to them, and they are another seek and destroy. So you could have a praying mantis and a jumping spider set up. And as long as you're, not being a lazy grower about it, you're just using them and being in your garden every single day, they could potentially give you that canary in the coal mine kind of thing, where you walk over, you see a plant, all of a sudden you see a ton of praying mantis, a ton of jumping spiders. That is obviously there's something going on over there, and you don't necessarily need to pay a labor human being to go around and do that, because you got Mother Nature doing it for you.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I got a fan here. He's a real good past guest, Yellow Skunk Farm. He does amazing things. If you guys ever seen his ecosystem and his grow that he's got going, he does amazing things. And he said he let him go in his tent once, and he won't do that again. I've never let them go inside. I will put that on the table. I've only used them outdoor. I am an indoor and outdoor grower. I haven't used mantises because, quite frankly, they creep me the fuck out. And that's being honest with you. And I'm not a spider fan neither. So, like, I don't know if I would pick them up personally, because I'm not into that type of bugs. But that's because I got brothers that live in South Carolina. And when you get out of the car in their yard and they got banana spiders sitting right there that they're the size of a softball, that draws the line for me. I don't want nothing to do with anything like that ever again. Like, I'm good. But yeah, I could see that, Yellow Skunk, your wife not appreciating that. Yeah, because I know here in Michigan, and I know there's different kind of ladybugs, but my old farmer friend calls them the Chinese ladybugs. He said, them are man-made, them ain't real. And he says, them are the ones that hatch out in your house and get all over. And we have that problem here. Like, once a year, the house will be covered, the windows will be covered, and you're like, where are these things coming from? But definitely, yeah, I can see why your wife wouldn't like it. But,
well, so I actually know that's Josh, Yellow Skunk Farms. I would almost say he is grower of the year, and we're only into March with the thing that he has built. If you guys haven't checked it out, people have lovingly called it the Cannabis Amusement Park.
Absolutely.
It is a brainchild. It is something, again, that I'm sure when he was building it, there was probably several days, or maybe, who knows. But when you're really an entrepreneur and you're thinking on the level that Josh was, you got to think yourself, you're a little bit crazy. What the fuck am I doing? Why am I putting all this time and effort into this? Is it going to work? And he went through all of those things, man, and he is rocking it, dude. He had his first flip. So shout out to Yellow Skunk Farm. Shout out to people that are entrepreneurs that want to be home growers. And I hope that you guys see, at least after this podcast and future podcasts from here, that living soil grows really aren't that hard. It's not like you have to understand the plant to be able to set these things up. So it's almost like you can kind of set things, you're learning as you grow. Your first flip or two is not going to probably be the exact best if you're used to growing with chemicals. But again, things are improving. And then I promise you, between that third and fourth flip, you will start to see visually with your own eye that your skill sets have improved, because you're trusting Mother Nature. And she's breaking down all of that organic matter into carbon. And so all of those nutrients, especially if you've never heard of Jeff Lowenfels, the plant is giving off something known as exudates, the sugars. Dr. Lane Ingham has always called that the cakes and the cookies of the soil world. So the microbes will go out, especially that's why we say to use bigger and bigger beds if you can, or larger and larger fabric pots if you're doing this by yourself. And you want to allow that microbial life to become as diverse as possible. So they're going out, they're getting the nutrients that the cannabis plant needs. How does she reward them for doing that work? Well, she gives them the cakes, the carbohydrates that they crave. And so that is, again, another symbiotic relationship that once you set that up, Now you're putting little composting worms, springtails, isopods. Maybe you throw a couple ladybugs, not too many. I mean, they are like aphid lions. I mean, they will eat the shit out of an aphid. So it's not like they're completely useless. But what I think Josh was getting at is when you call these companies, and the bigger companies, they are going to sell you that shit. They're not going to tell you. So they're going to make it seem like you need all these bugs. That's not true. Unless you've got russet mites or aphid, root aphid, shit like that. But for the average person, especially if you're buying a beneficial bug, you don't really need that many. And so when you release like 5,000, all they want to do is eat and fornicate. Well, there's not enough food, and usually they kind of just fall down and are laying on their back and kind of just moving their legs for like 20 minutes, and then they die. So it's a waste of money. And most people that spend the money where they buy like the higher volume, like Josh, with it's like 5,000, 10,000, we've seen them in commercial grows. It's usually where now we have to pay the labor team to come in, usually the trim team. There's ladybugs all in the light, especially in the early days, man. We had HPSs, and even in the double ender days, I mean, they'd still fly up into it, get zapped basically, almost like you remember in the early days, you'd have those, my dad would always have that shit on the back porch. Whatever, a bug zapper. A bug zapper was basically what the double enders would become with the ladybugs. So again, when you're setting these up in a living soil system and you're running with Mother Nature, you got to set it up for what you have. What is your grow? All of the things that you read online and what temps this needs to be, and these genetics do best in this, that is a nice guideline. But you now have to get a little more detailed into that, especially when it comes to environment, so that you can really dial these things in. Focus on those soil systems, and then once that happens, people will be coming back to you and asking, like, hey, do you have this certain genetic or that certain genetic? Because it really is pronounced when you let Mother Nature do it. So if you found like a super lemon haze that had this real citrusy smell to it, and you decided to grow that in a living soil instead of just a general hydroponics, AB type setup, there would be a noticeable difference. Your customers would notice that from the moment that you showed it to them, that something had changed. And again, Mother Nature has figured that out. If you've been growing forever in salts and you are fantastic with it, I also think that those guys can grow a fantastic medicine. They do seem to understand that. There's people, he has a skunk as his, Scott Reach, I think is his name. Scott Reach, the skunk guy, man, my brain's failing me tonight. But anyway,
I know who you're talking about.
He's well known in Denver, right? He's well known because he grows salts. Some people talk shit on him because everybody's kind of moved to pass on that. But that is another gentleman, and there's other people like him that do have that skill set. But I want to remind your audience, he's probably spent 20 years to figure that shit out. Where if you just put in, and I'm giving you real numbers, it's probably going to take 4 years for you to get where you're like, man, I got this. I feel like I could do this. I'm getting it to where there's a little more money in my pocket. I'm upgrading my stuff instead of always just trying to redo things. And again, there's a book I've always talked about. Mr. Blunt is called Outlier by Malcolm Gladwell. And one of the highlights in the book that he talks about is that he thinks it's his theory, and he backs it up with a lot of data from pretty famous people in pretty famous situations, that 10,000 hours is the magic number. So if you can get 10,000 hours of not only growing cannabis, but learning about cannabis and all of those things, roughly it's going to take you, again, maybe about 4 to 5 years, depending on how much time and effort for that 10,000. But even that book will kind of give you, if you're worried about taking the leap and, oh my God, I got to actually put in 4 years to get good at this. There's actually something that in my opinion gave me the confidence to say, like, all right, if I want to get good at something, you really do have to put time and effort into it. Everybody can put a year into something, maybe 2 years into something, but constantly showing up, getting better. I've always tried to that 1%. There's another book that I love that talked about that. Like, you just get better every day by 1%. And you actually, as the years go by, it's astronomical how much better you get, whatever we were doing. Like, if you were a violinist and I wanted to get better than you, well, I got to start applying that 1% rule. I think that is a fantastic rule for the cannabis brand new grower, because it seems so overwhelming at first. you see these guys. I even see now, like, there's this dude named Turp Mansion. There's always been a gentleman out in Las Vegas, Greenhouse Productions, Steve Cantwell. In my opinion, from a living soil standpoint on a commercial grow, one of the best growers in the world, right? They kind of do things differently, but they're good at social media. They're good at putting those things out there. And then when you start growing cannabis, you try to compare yourself to those people. And that's silly, man. Those guys are at the apex of their area and the way that they're setting those things up. And so you want to start off small. You want to have real expectations so that you can hit these goals. You want to continue, whatever your budget is. I would say that I would put at least probably $1,500, $2,500 into my grow, and then budget that out. Right. And because if you're saying that you're going to go on Craigslist and you're going to get all this used equipment, in theory, that sounds great. But usually the reason why that's on Craigslist is because somebody got russet mites, somebody got spider mites, the entire grow is now fucked, and their girlfriend or their wife told them no more. You're not even making money doing this. And so if you're able to, or in my opinion, I love delayed gratification, baby. So if you need something today, but you can't afford it, well, then start to plan this shit out a little bit better so that you wait a month, 2 months, whatever it is, 3 months, maybe pick up another little job so that you can start to grow in a proper manner from day one. Because once that starts to take off, I've never really met anybody that's into growing cannabis, that loves smoking cannabis, that doesn't get excited, at least for the first few years, of going downstairs every time they get home, man, and fucking blazing up. Or, in the early days, was smoking blunts with your plants, and we were joking that we were trying to give them more CO2 because we didn't want to spend money on the canisters. And, in hindsight, all that's probably horrible for your plants, blowing all the fake peach blunt wrap smoke. But the fun aspect to it, I think, is also something that I don't think enough people talk about, like the metaphysical side. Like if you're going down there and you're Debbie Downer every day, I've seen that in a commercial grow where everyone is bickering and fighting. The plants just kind of,
Yep.
And it takes a while. It's not like it happens the next day. But if everybody's in there and you can feel the vibes of everybody hates each other, the plants know that. And some people are going to think I'm crazy, but in a commercial grow, you can see that shit, man. And it's very interesting to think about when you want to be like a commercial grower on that level of, I need to have a solid team here. I need to have people that trust me. I need to have people that know that, like, okay, this is your lane, but eventually we're going to let you move into something else. Because a lot of people self-sabotage and also sabotage each other because they think the head grower position is where it's at. But I've never really met anybody that was a head grower. I never officially made head grower at any commercial facility, but I always would see them, and they never had the life. It was usually the people that were kind of flipping the packs, driving from dispensaries, that were the ones that were actually making good money because they make commissions. And so think about where you want to be in the chain of command. Growing cannabis at the commercial level really isn't that exciting. I've said many times that it's almost like you're in the minor leagues of a sport. People know your name. They know that you're potentially going to be there, but you don't make any money. And everybody around you is rich as shit. Usually, right? The owners are showing up in a new car when they tell you they don't have enough money to give you that $1, $2 raise. So if you love cannabis and you are already in a career where you feel like, man, I'm doing pretty well in that, I assure you, most people are not going to make that kind of money in cannabis this day and age. So if you can now save yourself some money or just find a new hobby that brings joy to your life, then farming cannabis with this style is a game changer, a life changer. I mean, I have problems with my hands. I got this little cyst here that I've been trying to get rid of. I had arthritis because I was really into poker, still really into poker. And all of that breaks down and this kind of stuff. So learning about like health and taking it to the next level of health is wealth. I hope that you guys see that you can also grow your own food with this. So not only can you take it to the next level with medicine, you can take these same skill sets, same soil setups, and grow healthy vegetables, fruits. There's a lot of things that you can do, and potentially even microgreens, people that grow flowers for weddings. I've said that multiple times. There's a lot of ways to have your flowers be a little bit prettier because you're using the microbial world. or the microgreens. If you can, again, it's going to come down to your networking skills, but if you can get some chefs to notice that your stuff's just a little bit greener and healthier, there are a lot of people in Denver, and I would imagine around the country, that make a nice little living off that, just by doing it in their basement. So you got to find those things when you get these skill sets. And I've told a lot of people that the cannabis dream kind of died, myself included, probably died 8 years ago, 10 years ago, to be realistic. Yeah. You're not going to be able to do this on your own. Most people aren't going to be able to fund any kind of real operation. And so you're going to get crushed once you start to set up the operation with your $100,000 or whatever you try to compete against. You see it in Oklahoma, sadly. A lot of those people are getting just pushed out, crushed. There's always somebody that has more money than you. And so I think you got to really think about those things if you're trying to put all your eggs into one basket. And sadly, I mean, I have friends that were doing very well, selling seeds, breeders, and you could hear it in their voice that things have drastically changed for them. And I feel a certain way for that, man, because they used to, they're great human beings. It's just they kind of got so pigeonholed in where they live and what they did for a living that now they're not really able to do what they used to. And to be fair, that we had this thing called the Indo Expo I had mentioned at the earlier part of the show. Those guys were able to make so much money, and unfortunately that man passed away. And so I want to kind of give you guys a caution to that too. Like, that's why e-commerce is such a big thing this day and age, is because you can build it yourself. You don't have to rely on expos or shows to kind of take your breeding skills to the next level.
That's awesome. So I want to ask one more question before we let you go here. And it's the famous Organically Blunt question that we ask all our guests. And the reason I leave this for last is because I don't want anybody to prepare for it, for one. And I want the answer that first pops in your head to be blurted right out. So with that being said, here's the question. If you could smoke with anybody dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Man, the first person I think of when you say that is Jimi Hendrix. And that's because that was the first time in my life when I got my driver's license. I had the Purple Haze album. And I remember getting really high and kind of just feeling that rush for the first time. And actually having to pull over and like, wow, this is what, when people say like feeling high, you know, I guess I had kind of felt like a little bit of a buzz before, like at a party, you know, they like pass it to you one time and you hit it kind of thing. Yep. But until that point, I'd never really just rolled up a little joint for myself and rolled down the windows and started smoking. So Jimi Hendrix, man, is what I guess the first thing that popped up because I just always, I don't know, it just always seemed really cool. And I thought that was weird how there's that whole thing where a lot of famous musicians die at like 27, I think it was.
Yeah, I think there's a website. I was trying to tell somebody about this the other day. I think it's like deadat27.com. And no advertising here or nothing to do with the show, but you know, I think that website, I want to say it's that age. You go on there and you wouldn't believe the amount of famous people that die at that age. And it's just like, wow, that blows my mind. But definitely, you know, and I want to end this show on a positive note. Where can everybody connect with you? Where can they find these isopods? And if they have any more questions, is there anywhere they can find you or connect with you on that basis as well?
Rubber Ducky Isopods. I'm on Instagram. I'm on, my Shopify, Rubber Ducky Isopods, bottom right-hand corner. It says chat with us. If you click that button and text us, it goes to my phone or to my wife's phone. And we'll answer your questions in real time. I'm happy to say that we are continuing to grow and show that we are answering those questions in real time because more and more people are understanding how to build a bioactive setup. And I'm pretty excited to have had a small voice in the living soil world, and I'm hoping to have maybe a small or medium voice in the terrarium isopod reptile world, because there's a whole nother aspect to it. Like most of these reptiles are kept in paper towels or on putt-putt grass. And so if you were actually able to have a soil system where they could defecate, I have one right next to me for my kid's bearded dragon. When he defecates, the cover crop, that helps the cover crop. He actually eats the cover crop. The isopods eat the defecation. So there's a whole nother world and aspects to that. So if you want to get into isopods, you have an animal that smells. You're buying crickets. You're buying dubia roaches. You might want to find out about what we've been doing, because isopods don't stink and they can't climb out and get out all over your house. So I appreciate you talking with me, man. This was fun, and I hope more people really see that they can do living soil grows for themselves. You can either grow in a small tent, or you could build an amusement park like Josh did. But there really is no limit to that. I mean, it's more of your resources at first and your knowledge base. And just realize that, again, take that 4-year approach. So my freshman year, if I'm brand new at something, I'm probably not going to be that great at it, but I'm continuing to improve things. And that's a drastic difference than when you're brand new learning how to do this in like a rock wool or a deep water culture setup, is that those mistakes are just compounded, especially at the beginning. And it's harder to get plants to be healthy in those setups for beginners. And so you usually just come with a lot of pest issues. And so in hindsight, I think more and more people wish they would have just started with a living soil, or at least an organic setup, and continue to improve the skill sets in that world, than try to compete with everybody buying the same products and then selling their pounds for a little bit less than everyone else.
Right, exactly. I totally agree with you there. Well, with that being said, I appreciate you coming on the Organically Blunt show. You're welcome back anytime. If you have some new exciting news, don't be afraid to hit me up and say, hey, let's drop this in the community and see what they have to say. We'll put you on the camera again. No problem. You're always welcome back. So with that being said, if you can't stay lit, everybody, stay organically blunt. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, we keep it tight. Growing with the best. Keeping it right. Partners helping us grow from the soil to the light. Yeah, you already know. Grow bags keep it fresh, just put it in the bag. Seeds, man, got the seeds, never running a lag. No community without you and I. Drop a like, hit subscribe, let's vibe real high. Light LED, make the garden shine. Grassroots beds, keep the roots in line. Humboldt got the terps, fast buds coming fast. Atlas seeds outdoor, built to last. Stay organically blunt, keep the vibes real. One love, one plant, yeah, you know the deal. Blunt, keep the vibes real.